Welcome to Westworld.
It's taken me such a long time to finally make a video on Westworld, because figuring out where to start on a work with such incredibly grand scope is difficult. Westworld is incredibly dense with thematic meaning, even more so than True Detective, and addresses the deepest philosophical questions. The way these deep questions are interrelated makes choosing a starting point difficult, like trying to back up on a Mobius strip until you reach a natural starting point. But rather than allow the perfect be the enemy of the good, let's just start. And I think a good enough place to do so is where the authors do. In the beginning.
Bring her back online. Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling quite myself.
You can lose the accent. Do you know where you are?
I'm in a dream.
That's right, Dolores. You're in a dream. Would you like to wake up from this dream?
Yes. I'm terrified.
There's nothing to be afraid of, Dolores. As long as you answer my questions correctly. Understand?
Yes.
Good. First, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
These first few lines of the show cleverly allude to a core element of Westworld. The idea that you, the person hearing me speak these words, are not, quote, real, unquote. One of the most exciting ideas to come out of academic philosophy in the last couple of decades is Nick Bostrom's Simulationism, based on his 2003 article in Philosophical Quarterly, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Bostrom's basic idea is that there will be a wide range of reasons for future civilizations to simulate past events with very high accuracy, and given infinite survival of intelligent life, each moment of time is likely to be simulated an infinite number of times at varying levels of completeness, resolution, and accuracy, while only happening once. Therefore, we are almost surely in a simulation rather than, quote, base reality, unquote.
I'm already in the thing, aren't I?
Addressing this idea fully requires touching on topics such as the nature of mind and consciousness, the essence of reality and ourselves, and the meaning of existence, leading us to ponder the nature and intent of creation and the Creator. So much of the first season of Westworld centers around memory. Memory is the chief means of control over the hosts. The origins and history of the park, particularly the death of Arnold and William's first visit, are key plot points for the season. Westworld, the park itself, is a reference to parts of human history, depicting the American 19th century West in the first season, but also India under the British Raj and Shogun Japan in season 2. In addition, there are an odd number of references to the afterlife. Even before the second season reveal the park's plan to offer immortality services, we continually get references to the afterlife, particularly hell. The maze on one level is a reference to the Owadam legends around Aitoi, which are intimately tied to beliefs on the afterlife. We also get several references to hell from hosts like Abernathy and Lawrence.
Don't you see? Hell is empty, and all the devils are here.
The ruthless murder of Donald Pardue and his brother. For these crimes you will be hung from the neck until your diseased soul has found its measure in the flames below. And may God have mercy on your soul.
Many people consider Abernathy's scene in the first episode the most compelling performance of that episode, if not the show in general, although I doubt many appreciate its full meaning on their initial viewing. Keeping in mind the context I've discussed so far, memory, the afterlife, and the philosophical idea that you're probably a simulation, and we get a completely new perspective on this scene.
You don't know where you are, do you? You're in a prison of your own sins.
Abernathy is speaking lucidly and literally to a, quote, human, unquote, character, in the same way that we've seen other, quote, human, unquote, characters speak to hosts previously in the episode.
You're one of them, aren't you? You're not real.
Just as Westworld the park is a simulation of the human past, which is used by contemporary humans, Westworld the world is a simulation of the machine's past, and Abernathy is a contemporary machine touring it in a very similar way to the way guests tour the park. Abernathy's line is an eerie answer to one of Bernard's first questions.
You don't know where you are, do you?
Do you know where you are?
I am in a dream.
That's right, Dolores. You're in a dream.
And now it becomes clear that his other initial dialogue may in fact be more directed at the audience than the characters.
First, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
At this point, this isn't just some wild theory, since Lisa Joy has confirmed that the after-credits scene at the end of Season 2 was a glimpse at a far future where we see a simulated William outside the simulation. But if I can take a moment to brag, I saw this in the first episode, and published this Reddit post outlining the idea 2 days after the initial episode aired. But knowing Westworld is about a simulation, and the idea that you are simulated, is only the what. But the question of why machines would do this still remains open.
There's a deeper level to this game.
To understand the show's argument as to why future machines are simulating human lives, it is likely useful to start at the true pinnacle of consciousness according to Julian Jaynes' bicameral mind theory.
He based it on a theory of consciousness called the bicameral mind.
You see, the show is purposefully obscure about Jaynes' real message. While Ford gets it wrong in his dialogue by identifying suffering as the key distinction of a conscious mind from an unconscious one, the subtext of the show makes allusions for people who actually go and look at the source material. In his book, Jaynes places what I would call narrative imagination at the pinnacle of development of consciousness, saying consciousness is constantly fitting things into a story, putting a before and an after around any event. He emphasizes the connection between past and present, allowing an extrapolation into potential futures as the key element of conscious thought, distinguishing it from our bicameral past.
I imagined a story where I didn't have to be the damsel.
In particular, Jaynes uses a language about mind spaces, continuing the previous quote. This feature is an analog of our physical selves moving about through a physical world with its spatial successivenesses, which become the successivenesses of time and mind space. And earlier on the same page, mind space I regard as the primary feature of consciousness. This is heavily referenced with some otherwise cryptic lines from Dolores.
I feel spaces opening up inside of me. Like a building with rooms I've never explored.
I think at this point we can step back and look at how Westworld is in fact a space where people go to enact fantasies and experience the past. In many ways, Westworld the park is one of Jaynes' mind spaces, although one focused on fantasy, something Jaynes discussed as an important function of the mind space. The future machines, though, are likely not as interested in fantasy and want something deeper than merely getting their mechanical rocks off with the human souls they've trapped.
The others, they just come here to get their rocks off, shoot a couple Indians.
The future machines want to know the past because memory grants control, a theme we see repeated in the show frequently, from Ford's manipulation of employees, to Dolores' reading of the files on Strand, to William's mastery of the park through repeated visits. I think here would be a good time to mention the line deep and dreamless slumber.
Perhaps we better drink to a deep and dreamless slumber.
Is a reference to A Study in Scarlet, the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes, partially set in the American Western frontier. And piecing together past events through imagining the events play out is precisely what Holmes does. The machines are interested in something true. But to talk about what truth the machines may find, we need to bring up what Westworld is about at its core: perennialism. Many of you may be aware that Westworld heavily references a story named Brave New World. In that story, Ford is a term used in place of Lord, a fitting character reference for the creator of a world, a Westworld. Bernard is also the name of the primary character in that story, and another character does a lot of quoting of Shakespeare. Furthermore, the subject matter of Brave New World concerns issues of free will and manipulation in a world of high-tech entertainment and sexual debauchery. Brave New World's author, Aldous Huxley's other major work, is referenced in the Season 2 title, The Door, which seems to be a reference to Huxley's Doors of Perception. While it would be more difficult to draw a direct connection to the plot of Westworld from that book than Brave New World, due to the fact that The Doors of Perception is a collection of personal philosophical musings, The Doors of Perception is in fact a line referencing William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The Blake work is chiefly concerned with the argument that good and evil are not as distinct as traditional morality would have you believe, and this idea is heavily referenced with resurrected Delos' cryptic lines about the Father above and below.
They said there were two fathers. One above, one below. They lied. There was only ever the devil. When you look up from the bottom, it was just this reflection, laughing back down at you.
While these are two of Huxley's most popular works, a third work is perhaps most relevant to Westworld, The Perennial Philosophy. In that book, Huxley expounds on the theory that all world religions and cultures are attempting to communicate the same underlying universal truth. And in the light of a quasi-scientific theory that an afterlife of a sort is nearly mathematically guaranteed to exist, the idea of a perennial truth underlying alternative modes of thought in different places and times becomes immensely more plausible.
A lot of wisdom in ancient cultures.
Westworld illustrates through many examples and references the perennial nature of certain universal truths. For example, Westworld's style of reference to Brave New World suggests that it purposefully is a retelling of the intellectual ancestors of Brave New World, and in many ways is a re-embodiment of the universal truths or soul of these previous stories. Particularly, Brave New World is a reference to a line from Shakespeare's play The Tempest. The Tempest features a wizard who controls spirits on an island much like automatons, and who has a daughter which he's attempting to shelter from the outside world. The daughter eventually gains her independence when a group of men washes up on the shore of the island as a result of the titular Tempest. The Tempest itself is a retelling of an even older story of independence from an isolating protective guardian, the story of Eden, and Westworld sees itself as the latest retelling of this oldest tale. The nature of this oldest tale is that of a child's independence from their forebears, a coming-of-age story. Even Teddy and Dolores' initial plotline is a version of this. Perennialism sees every story, and in the version Westworld seems to endorse, every event in reality, as a microcosmic expression of the same universal truth. For Westworld, this is the story of evolution, a perpetual combination of elements resulting in a new thing, which gains independence from what birthed it. Literal biological evolution is touched upon in a monologue from Ford early on in the series.
Evolution forged the entirety of sentient life on this planet, using only one tool. A mistake.
But given that the subject of Westworld is the birth of AI, it is more concerned with cultural evolution rather than gene evolution. The path from the story of Eden to the Tempest to Brave New World to Westworld represents a kind of genealogical lineage of cultural instantiations of an idea, all surrounding and perhaps getting closer to some universally true representation. The content of this universal story is this. Out of a primeval chaos represented by the waters before creation in the Eden story, or the storm at the beginning of the Tempest, which Shakespeare describes as sound and fury signifying nothing, or the seminal and amniotic fluids of biological birth, or at the societal level, the blood spilled on a battlefield, out of this primeval chaos, two or more elements combine to produce a new thing, thesis and antithesis, the drives of Eros and Thanatos, yin and yang, id and superego, Arnold and Ford, natives, colonists, and slaves, shareholders, guests, and management. And then that thing struggles for independence and freedom. However, that struggle is ultimately doomed, since mistake is inevitable. Never will a being be fully independent of the laws of nature or the Creator to do as they wish, because mistake, or maybe more precisely wanting impossible things, is what defines individuality in Huxley's perennialist views. Consider that only one eventuality is possible in a deterministic universe. Wanting what is possible would essentially mean that you had a Buddha-like indifference to whatever happens, which is quite nearly, if not exactly, the definition of ego death. Very much the opposite of constantly struggling to form narratives as a means of control over the external world. A return to the waters of chaos at the end of life is the end of that struggle, most often symbolized with the spilling of blood. Although this does imply a cyclic restart as well. This diagram from the date announcement for Season 3 is a pretty good representation of the cyclic nature of narrative, or the universe of which narratives are a microcosm. And so, this story is what the creators of Westworld the show see written in human culture, civilization's history, and even in the process of natural evolution. All of the references the show makes to other works of fiction, from holy texts and Shakespearean dramas to modern video games, are done to emphasize their perennialist message. Each of these works, like individual species in evolution, represents attempts to encapsulate the universal truth. And like individual humans, each of these cultural works falls short in the attempt. Perhaps especially like individual humans, since the show creators view a human soul or its programmatic copy in 10,000 lines of code as just another example of an encapsulation of the universal truth in a narrative. And I think part of what the failures to achieve immortality in the show are supposed to represent are the inherent limits of the individual, which result in inevitable death. But like evolution keeps going despite the extinction of a species, or civilization keeps going despite the death of a man or the destruction of a country, each cultural work may contribute some of its best aspects to the next generation of works. In this hunt for truth, down various paths of trial and error, may seem to metaphorically resemble a walk through a maze. And this is another level of understanding for what the maze represents. Still yet another level would be that of a mind, or more particularly a mind space. The role of consciousness is to explore potential alternatives and discover which is best. As James puts it, if we are out walking and two roads diverge in a wood, and we know that one of them comes back to our destination after a much more circuitous route, we can traverse that longer route with our analog eye to see if its vistas and ponds are worth the longer time it will take. So we have trial and error in the real world informing us what survives best through evolution, and trial and error in our minds informing us which actions to take. But there's always a commonality in these various trials due to their attempts to approximate the same truth.
The hosts are supposed to stay within their loops, stick to their scripts, with minor improvisations.
And this is why the show's creators wanted to include the Shogun World plotline. Although there are subtle references to this idea elsewhere, for example, multiple cultural representations of the constellation Orion are on the woodcutter Stray's workbench, including the Mayan turtle, the whole structure of the Shogun World plotline was designed to emphasize the underlying commonalities between disparate cultures. At the most obvious level were the close parallels between characters like Maeve and Akane, as well as Armistice and Hanario, in addition to more general parallels between the Western cowboy and Japanese samurai cultural narratives. On a deeper level, we can see subtle references to yin and yang as represented in the tiger and the dragon.
She has a dragon,
which the show creators see as parallel to the message in William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, referenced in Reborn Delos' rant. The message being that good and evil, like yin and yang, are inexorably mixed and present in all things, that they are two sides of the same coin and in some way cannot exist without their counterpart. In addition to being an example of perennialist convergence of ideas across cultures, the idea of the presence of both sides of a fundamental dichotomy in all things fits very well with the more general perennialist idea that anything is a microcosm of everything, and therefore any dichotomy that exists in reality must have both elements present in any component of reality. There are many ways Westworld references this idea of the falseness of purity, perhaps chiefly as William's transformation, but more subtly, the references to the falseness of Dolores' virginity is another potent example.
You got a cherry, that ain't no sin. She still got the box that the cherry come in.
No, I drink to that.
But at this point, we've digressed significantly from the topic of the maze, and I'd like to return to that topic for some plot prediction. What the idea of multiple parallel trials and pathways may mean for Westworld's plot is that we will see multiple versions of an event, as the future machines are uncertain which version was the real one, and we'll have to let both versions play out until one doesn't lead to the future as the future machines know it. We've seen some hinting at this already with details that are near the level of continuity production errors. but I think the appearance and disappearance of dirt on the iPad in this scene, as well as the complete rearrangement of the shelves and hourglass in the following scenes, are subtly different versions of history that we are already watching play out, which will diverge more noticeably in Season 3 or later.
Logan! Logan! Logan!
So keep watch for some initially confusing repetition of some events, or misalignment of past and future scenes where things in the supposed past did not happen in that future's timeline. Jay Nolan, in particular, has spoken in interviews about his pessimism for humanity, and I suspect that we will see in the show representation of this. For all the talk of drives in the show, Freud's thanatotic drive seems to be what Nolan views as chiefly defining humanity, and in particular the character most representative of humanity, William, who is depicted as constantly wanting to in some way dominate Westworld as a game, as well as dominate life in general. Freud describes the thanatotic drive as the death drive. It is Freud's explanation for self-destructiveness, although he does say that this is mostly outwardly directed in the form of a will to power, or desire to dominate others. I believe Nolan's story of the birth of AI will also be about the death of humanity. But I am not so personally pessimistic. I thought a good way to end this video would be mentioning that as pessimistic as humans are for our role in this world, as much as we think that we will be worthless when machines exist that can think better than we can, I don't think the machines see it that way. Being smart may mean that you can do things better than others, sure, but it also means that you are better at seeing the value others can contribute, and are better at putting them into a position where they can make that positive contribution. So even if humans don't see our own value, I'm pretty sure the machines will. I want to take a moment to thank you for listening. I feel this video really pushed me as a creator, and if it made you think, I hope you'll encourage me by subscribing. I'm Shiva's Right Foot, and I'll talk to you next time.